I'm willing to bet that you've heard what Matthew chapter 1 says before, Jesus' genealogy, where Matthew records all of Jesus' ancestors, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, all the way back to Abraham. But I'm also willing to bet that you've never really stopped and thought about these people's stories, because some of these guys are incredibly flawed. So you stop and think, how can God possibly use me? I go back and read these stories of Jesus' ancestors, people that God used in a powerful way. Maybe some of the most important people ever to have lived were very, very flawed on some occasions. So let's stop and take a couple of minutes and think about what made them usable by God. Check out Matthew chapter 1. Starting in verse 1, he says, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. Who's Tamar? Well, she was married to Judah's son. In fact, she was married to both of Judah's sons. One died, and then the other one married her. He eventually died, and she was promised to Judah's third son. But he never followed through. He didn't give her his third son because the other two had died, and he was scared that being married to Tamar was some sort of curse. And so she goes back to her dad's house, and she lives there for years. Eventually, she dresses up like a prostitute and goes out and stands on the road. Where Judah passes by, he comes in and he sleeps with her, and she gets pregnant with Perez and Zerah. That's Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother, an incredibly flawed person who dressed up like a prostitute to have a baby. Incredibly flawed. Who else is in this list? Keep on reading down in verse 6. You find Rahab was in this list of Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, right? Rahab the prostitute, who was not even an Israelite, not of the people of God. She's an outsider, much less a very visible sinner, right? She's a prostitute, much like Rahab dressed up to be. Tamar rather dressed up as a prostitute. Rahab actually is one. And so God still uses her though. Why? Let's keep on reading. There's another couple people I wanted to point out. Jesse, the father of David the king, and David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. Why does he include the wife of Uriah? Why does Matthew go out of his way to include the fact that David went out, killed Uriah, and took Bathsheba for his wife? And Jesus comes through that line. Why does Matthew go out of his way to prove that, to point that out? Because I think Matthew, just like these 3 or 4 people we pointed out, and there are others in this genealogy that fit this bill, but Matthew is a scandalous sinner. He's an outcast. He's a nobody. Nobody wants to be around Matthew because he's a tax collector. He's an ugly guy. He's an outcast. Nobody wants Matthew anywhere near them. But God still calls Matthew. He was still used by God. And so what do all these people have in common besides their flaws, besides their treachery, besides their sin, besides their betrayal, besides their lust, beside all the flaws that are very evident in Jesus' ancestors? What do these people have in common? They were all used by God in a very powerful way because they were sold out to Him. These guys were 100% faithful. They weren't 100% perfect, but they were sold out for His purposes, just like Matthew was. And that's why they received this grace. That's why they were being able to be used by God, because they were 100% sold out for Him. They were His slaves. They went wherever He told them to go. They thought whatever He told them to think. They were sold out for Him. And so there's times in your life, probably just like when there's times in mine, when I think, how can God ever use me? I've made so many mistakes, and I've lived this life of treachery and duplicity and ugliness. And then I go back and I read Jesus' genealogy. And I think about His ancestors and how flawed and ugly some of these people's lives were, but I see him still using them because of this scandalous grace that our God delivers to everybody that takes it. Everybody that's 100% sold out to him receives this scandalous grace. People didn't think Matthew was worthy of it, and he wasn't. But he was still given this scandalous grace, just like Paul was, the murderer. People thought he wasn't worthy of it, and he wasn't, but he still received it. I'm not worthy of it either, but I still received it. He can still use you, no matter what kind of life you've led previous to this point. If you sell out to Christ, he gives you scandalous grace. Grace that completely lets you off the hook. And then he can use you to do incomprehensible things. Sell yourself out to him. Become his completely. No looking back. Wholeheartedly his. And he can use you to do phenomenal things.